Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Josh and I run an independent wealth management firm. Now today I wanted to talk to you guys about the biggest mistakes that I've ever made in running a financial advisory business. As an investor or as someone who's an aspiring financial advisor, what can you learn from my biggest screw ups? Time to think like an investor. So what are my most embarrassing stories, or the stories where I look back and think, man, you really messed up there. You could have had it way worse. You could have ended up losing your company or losing a really great client or something like that. Because as we go through our careers, there's going to be times when we mess up. There are going to be major failures. And as people like Ray Dalio and all sorts of thought leaders say, getting better or becoming the highest version of yourself really comes down to, can you reflect well on those experiences and become better and move on? Because that is such an important facet of being a business owner, realizing where you're weak and where you can kind of improve those things, right? I mean, it's so cliche. But one of the first stories that comes to mind for me was a mistake relating to confidentiality. And that's not something you ever want to hear, right? If you're a financial advisor or if you're like the client of one, imagine this. You don't want to be working with someone who would ever disclose a personal detail about you to someone else. Even if it's harmless, even if it's between somebody who's a friend and another client who's a friend, it doesn't matter how close the relationships are. You don't want information shared about you. You want to know that you're going to someone knowing that everything that you talk about with that person is between you and them, because that's how trust is built. At the end of the day, if you don't have trust, there is no advisory relationship. It's sales. Trust is the foundation of any advisory relationship, and this is where I screwed up. I remember one night I was sitting actually just at home with Alana. We were having like a nothing kind of evening, and I start getting texts, and they start going like boom, 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 like they start flying in, and I'm like, okay, what the heck's going on? And I look, and it's actually one of my very closest, favoritist, nice word, Josh. One of my favorite clients is texting me saying something like this, and it's in a very scurried fashion. She's like,
"Did you disclose details about me to another client that you have? You know that's breach of confidentiality. I can sue you for this."
And I was like, oh my God. And like, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, she's totally right. I've totally screwed up. And I'm just trying to jog my memory. Where in the world, how, in what way would I have ever disclosed something about this client to somebody else? And I'm trying to remember. But meanwhile, like, the blood's rushing my face. I've had to leave. I've had to walk outside. My girlfriend's like, "Are you okay? Like, is something happening? Like, are we okay?" And I just was speechless because I thought, how, as someone who was like always preaching what it means to be a good advisor and talking to other people about this thing, how could I have messed up so brutally? And I remembered what exactly had happened. And the reality of the situation is I had a very close friend who was a client, and this client in question that I'm talking about was also a very, I would consider, close friend. And so it wasn't as so much a client relationship as it was two friendships. And what had happened is these two other people, these two clients of mine, had met without me there. They had met completely on their own volition, and some random coincidence figured out that I was both of their financial advisor. So I met with my friend shortly after, and he said, "Hey, I met your client. Like, she's awesome. She's fantastic." And he's like, "What's she like? Like, tell me more." And I'm like, "Well, you know what? The reality is, like, yeah, she's great. Like, she's super smart. She's done really well financially. She's put away a lot of money and all that kind of stuff." And I kind of got talking about the financial implications rather than kind of her personal story. And that was really weird and really odd, but I remembered that I had actually been talking about that client about things that you probably wouldn't want to disclose as a financial advisor to somebody else. And so that didn't go well for me, as you could see, as I'm getting a swath of text messages later on from this client saying, "Hey, did you disclose details?" Because after I had talked with my friend, he had said that they had actually had a conversation where they were getting along, and the funny thing was, it was all a complete joke. So when I was reading through these text messages, I quickly got on the phone and she's like, "Haha, got you." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, are you freaking kidding me?" I was in a situation where for a minute I thought I lost my business because, you know what, I can pay the bills, but I can't afford to brush off a lawsuit. Like, that's not something that's in the cards for me. And here I thought I was gonna get sued and my business was going to be completely done for. That shocked my system, although I was lucky that they were joking around because I trusted them as friends. That's how close I was, that they would joke around and make them think together they were gonna play a joke and make it appear as if they were gonna sue me. And although my heart plummeted and the joke worked out fantastically well, I've now been sufficiently freaked out into never ever even talking just in coincidence or even lightly talking about different clients' particulars, about different things about them. I would now never disclose a piece of information about a client to a friend or someone else, even if they were asking, even if they were prying, even if it was very close personal relationships. I never want to have that feeling ever again of thinking that I've obliterated someone's trust by disclosing information. So the moral of the story here, guys, is as you grow your business in whatever you do, whatever professional service, whatever it might be, you're gonna learn to know hundreds of different people, and you're gonna learn to know the private particulars of hundreds of different people. You're gonna learn things about them that they wouldn't disclose with other people because you're a trusted person to them, okay? And there will be times where it feels very convenient. You're in a social setting and someone's name comes up and you know them and people are speculating, or maybe there's gossip or whatever. And it might really just help you, maybe from a status position. It might help you because it's convenient in conversation to talk about someone who is actually a client. And there, you're treading on thin ice. And the reason is because you are now riding the line between saying something that was trusted to stay between you and the client, or just trying to avoid it. And that's difficult. It's not exactly easy. But the reality is that there's nothing worse than having a client or having a friend or having someone you know where you just feel like you're not getting the whole truth from them. You feel like there isn't that underlying level of trust where we can both just be ourselves. And if you violate someone's trust by disclosing details, especially, or if you violate someone's trust by not fulfilling what you said you would do, now you're just introducing that. You're asking for people to be more superficial with you because they just don't feel they can trust you anymore. Now, all of this reminds me of another story because over a long period of time, I had built up trust with a family. And the son of this family was a very close personal friend of mine. We went to school together, we played sports together, all this sort of thing. And over time, they trusted me enough to support my business and have a lot of their family investments managed through me. Now, just a quick aside, as a financial advisor for me, when I'm dealing with clients' investments, one of the most important things I am doing from a high level is trying to make sure that a client's asset allocation is correct. And now this is what this is showing. It's showing, okay, for instance, I have a client's portfolio in front of me here. They're 88.6% in stocks, 10% in bonds, and around 1.3% in cash. We want to make sure as an advisor that at all times a client's portfolio is reflecting their goals, okay? This is something we have to be monitoring. We have to make sure that a client's portfolio isn't getting outside the realm of what is appropriate for them. For instance, if you have a client who wants to buy a house in like 2 or 3 years, they can't have a ton of risk in their portfolio. You don't want to see the stock portion of their portfolio become that big, because what could happen is you could have a massive crash. You could have a 2008, or you could have a pandemic, or all sorts of things that might just absolutely wreak havoc on the stock market. And what that means is they're going to freak out because they know they need that money in a year or 2 or 3 years for a house, and they see it drop. They see that diminish to 70% of what they invested if they're too aggressive, right? And vice versa. If you have a client who has a very long time horizon, their only plan is to retire, and that's like 20 years away. Their portfolio shouldn't be too conservative. Maybe they should look more like this, 80 or 90% of their money in stocks and 10% in bonds, okay? What I'm trying to get at here is asset allocation is of prime importance. And one of the biggest mistakes I ever made is that I had the assets across an entire family, which was kids, which was, even extended grandparents. I had the father and mother. And what ended up happening was, what I didn't understand is that some of the accounts had both the parent's name and the kid's name on the account. And what that meant is if I made an asset allocation change to the parent's account, what I didn't understand is that would also, by definition or by default, change the asset allocation of the kid's account. Okay, so the accounts were linked, the ownership was linked, which means that one change made to the parent's account would make a change to the kid's account. Now, what am I getting at here? Well, a few months before the pandemic hit and the market dropped like 35%, somewhere in that range, the father in this family asked me to increase the risk. Hey, I'm okay taking more risk. Like, let's bump this up because, I have money elsewhere that's very safe. I want to bump this up. So I said, okay, absolutely. That sounds great. He was a sophisticated investor. We had a conversation about it and we determined, yes, let's bump this up. But what that did is it bumped up the risk across the kids' accounts too. And the kids' accounts were not for necessarily completely long-term. A lot of that was money they wanted to save to buy a home or something like that. And so when the pandemic hit, that's when you realize if you've done a good job for your clients. You know, when the markets are just going up and up and up, it's quite easy to just feel as if everything you're doing is great, you're doing a fantastic job. But when a massive event occurs, like a crisis in the stock market, that's when you realize, oh shoot, there were a few portfolios that weren't necessarily perfectly appropriate. And you start to learn which clients, you know, are actually less risk tolerant than you really thought at the outset. But back to my story. The market drops, and what had happened is the asset allocation, the risk profile across the whole family's accounts had been increased. And what that meant is that two young kids who had my trust for a very long time and who trusted me saw their portfolio drop by 25% when it was supposed to be in a safer portfolio. Now, that's catastrophic. That's terrible, because what that means is, like, imagine seeing the money you had for a down payment and you trusted a friend and an advisor with that money, and that now drops 30% when you weren't expecting it to drop anywhere outside the realm of maybe 5% or 7%. That was the most you're willing to tolerate. So this was terrible circumstances. Nothing worse could possibly happen. And to boot, it's like a really great client. So it's like, shoot, not only have I blown their trust, but it's a big client. If they leave and they're upset now, like, this is going to be terrible for our business. And my mind just starts racing, right? Luckily, I met with them. We went for lunch, and I just kind of spilled my guts. I said, hey, here's what happened. I wasn't aware of this. I've learned my lesson. I apologize. There's not much I could do now. What I actually recommend, as insane as this is that we keep the risk where it is, because what we're going to have is the market's going to rebound. And statistically, we know that if we are down to this level, it is likely not too long before we see a rebound in the overall stock market. And now we're going to recoup those losses. If now, at the very bottom of this market crash, we switch you to something more conservative, you're essentially going to lock in those losses, and your account isn't going to grow as much on the way up. So the scariest part of the situation is I had to tell these clients, yes, we messed up, but if we want to recover, not only do we have to keep things as they are, we actually probably want to contribute more money. And that was just the most insane. I remember going into that meeting thinking, I'm going to sound like an absolute idiot. This is going to sound absolutely crazy. But luckily, those clients trusted me, and there were certain things we could do to make amends, but at the end of the day, they didn't come after me. And this is why in the industry, we have something called errors and omissions insurance. If that client was really out to get me, they could have sued me for those losses, because that was my negligence, it was my mistake. And again, luckily, we're doing this video because there hasn't been that many mistakes. There's been a handful, there's been 3 or 4, like the ones I'm telling you about. But the reality is that these situations felt like they could absolutely derail me. But luckily, because I had that client's trust, they ended up doing as I recommended. They said, Josh, this is a terrible situation. This shouldn't have happened. We're happy you've learned from this, and we're here to support you. We're going to add more money now, and we're just going to keep it where it is. And what happened? Well, the pandemic actually had the fastest rebound we've ever seen, and now that client is well up more than they invested, and luckily has more than they would have ever expected in terms of what they got from that house account. So anyways, guys, these are 2 stories I'm telling from kind of a place of vulnerability, because, you know, what kind of financial advisor who wants to market themselves online is going to come out and say, hey, here's how I blew it. Here's how I really screwed up multiple times. But the reality is I just want to be transparent for all the people who are learning to become financial advisors, or people who are managing their own investments and want to learn more, okay? Making sure your asset allocation is in the right place might not seem that important until a market crisis hits. And at that point, I messed up for that client. We luckily made our way out of it. But anyways, guys, these are some of the stories that go through my head when I think about what were the worst ways I screwed up. And a lot of the time in this business, the way that you're going to work around these is by being proactive. You need to be in a routine of reviewing clients' accounts every couple weeks or every couple months, making sure you know down to the detail, is this client in the right thing for their goals, and running through what if scenarios. If the market were to crash, are they going to be okay? Or if they want to withdraw this money earlier, is that going to be fine? Going through the process of, without your clients being there on your own volition, making things right without them ever knowing. And that's one of the greatest pieces of value you can provide. And if you're an investor, make sure your asset allocation is right. When the market crash comes, it's not easy to just prepare for that after the fact. You have to be prepared beforehand. So anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching this video. These were some of the big mistakes that I made as a financial advisor, and I hope that you can sidestep or avoid completely. So I hope you had some fun laughing at me and my pain and some of the jokes that were played on me by clients, and also, you know, some of the times that I actually had a legit issue. I actually really messed up, and luckily we're around today, and our clients, I have to thank them every single day for dealing with the mistakes that happen from time to time. But I hope you learned from this as an investor, as a financial advisor, and if you guys got any value out of this video whatsoever, make sure to hit that like button below, hit subscribe, and turn on post notifications for more videos just like this one every single week. Until next time.